Welcome everyone. The purpose of this video is to provide training that will allow FSBs to conduct formal regulatory or similar risk assessments on the COTIV system with confidence. We will be communicating a basic understanding of the risk assessment process and the terminology used. Thereafter, we will be taking a look at how this process is conducted on the COTIV system through analysis, evaluation of controls, and considering possible improvements in response. Let's consider some concepts related to the term risk. What is risk? The concept of risk is often described as the effect of uncertainty on objectives, and that an effect is either a positive or a negative deviation from what is expected. Risk can be transferred, tolerated, treated, or terminated. What is a risk-based approach? A risk-based approach is a method of decision-making and resource allocation that prioritizes activities based on their potential impact on objectives and the likelihood of those impacts occurring. In short, the fundamental idea is to focus efforts and resources on areas where the greatest risk exists. What is risk assessment? Risk assessment evaluates all the potential risks to your FSB's ability to do business. These include regulatory risks, enterprise risks, control risks, and inherent risks. Risk assessment is the overall process of risk identification, risk analysis, and evaluation to the achievement of business objectives. It forms a basis for determining how risks should be managed. There are various types of risk assessments, such as regulatory, operational, vulnerability-based, threat-based, just to name a few. The risk assessments currently available on the COTIV system mostly cover regulatory and operational risks. However, FSBs are free to add their identified operational, vulnerability, and threat-based risks for in-depth assessment on the risk assessment module. What is inherent and residual risk? Inherent risk is the level of risk exposure that exists in the absence of deliberate interventions or controls to manage the risk prior to management taking any mitigating actions. Residual risk is the level of risk that remains after controls and mitigation measures have been implemented by management to reduce the seriousness and/or probability of a risk. What is the risk assessment process? There are 4 basic steps to risk assessment. 1. Identify the risks, where various types of hazards or threats are being considered. 2. Determine who and what could be affected. The second step is to understand how the hazards or threats can be harmful, what could be the possible consequences if they materialized, and who would be affected. 3. Analyze the risks. Once risks have been identified, the next step is to analyze them and develop action plans to mitigate negative consequences. 4. Review risk assessments. In an ever-changing environment, risks should be reviewed periodically to ensure that all potential and new risks are included. What is risk analysis? The basic framework for risk analysis can be expressed as follows. 1. The quantification of uncertainties. 2. The estimation of potential impact. 3. The formulation and implementation of risk management controls. In this phase of the process, each identified risk is examined and assigned a rating. These ratings prioritize the risks so that it is clear which ones will require further mitigation. First, we evaluate the inherent risk, i.e., how exposed would the company be if we had 0 controls in place. By conducting the risk analysis, the process may typically involve any number of factors, such as likelihood. What is the probability that a risk will happen? Impact. What would be the impact should the risk occur? Velocity, which includes the time to cause. What period until the risk is next expected to occur? The time to impact. How quickly would the impact be felt in the business after the risk has occurred? Materialization, also referred to as materiality. What would be the potential severity of the impact? Key risk indicators. What changes in risk causes should be monitored that could potentially indicate that the risk may occur in future? For instance, if periodic management information indicates a deterioration in the standards set by management, this could be an indication that the risk of sanction could occur at any time. Risk consequences. It is important to list the consequences if a risk event occurred in terms of the following. What would be the actual consequences? What will be impacted? And how will they be impacted? Various methods of risk analysis or risk scoring may be applied, such as quantitative risk analysis expressed numerically, qualitative risk analysis according to a predetermined scale, low, medium, or high, semi-quantitative by combining quantitative and qualitative, asset-based, examples, hardware, software, networks, and data, generic, adaptable for multiple purposes, site-specific, focusing on the location, dynamic, may be performed in a limited time span, etc. The Cotiv Risk Assessment Method. The risk assessment tool on Cotiv is based on a qualitative risk assessment methodology used to identify and prioritize risks, providing a quick and straightforward approach, which has proven to be more user-friendly for the average FSP to conduct. Most of the risk assessment sets on Cotiv are regulatory-based, i.e. they originate from a piece of legislation or regulation published into law by regulators. There are also a generic or operational sets that can be used to assess any existential risks that the FSP may have identified and prioritized for assessment and remediation. The FSP can also use these sets to determine and process, for instance, its 10 highest risks in order of priority. To start an assessment, you need to select a relevant assessment as follows. On the horizontal top menu, click on Risk Management and select Assessments from the drop-down menu. If there are no assessments on the list to choose from, follow these steps to create a new risk assessment item. Click on the green button, indicating New. First select the set before populating the label. Refer to the 2024 Annual Compliance Program document to determine the recommended risk assessment sets to be conducted for your FSP during 2024. Select a recommended set, then label the set by adding your FSP's name and the name of the set that you have selected, as this wording will appear on the risk assessment report that will be generated once the risk assessment has been finally concluded. For instance, ABC Market Conduct Risk Assessment. Make sure the Use the Full Set of Statements button is selected as recommended. Lastly, save the record. Once the record is saved, you will be able to access it to start assessing and analyzing the risk factors items listed by clicking Continue the Risk Assessment on the right, in blue. When the selected risk assessment is opened, you will see two heat maps. The left will reflect the entity's inherent risk and the right will reflect the residual risk, after the existing internal controls have been listed and analyzed. Move the view down to see the listed risk factors statements and click on the first one to open it. A new window will open showing a short statement of the risk as well as an explanation of what it represents. If the risk assessment is based on a particular piece of legislation, called a regulatory risk assessment, there will be an extract included from the wording in the Act or regulations to show where it originates from. Directly above the statement, you will note three distinct sections: Risk, Control, and Improve. The statement appears at the top on all three of these sections for ease of having the particular risk in view, which is in the process of being analyzed, evaluated, and responded to. The first section, the Risk section, deals with an analysis of the risk where you will need to analyze and process the risk as follows. Inherent risk. Question to consider: how easy would it be for a breach to happen within the FSP if there were absolutely no controls in place? Likelihood. Question to consider: how likely is it that the risk will occur? Impact. Question to consider: in the event that the risk occurs, what will the impact be? Type of risk. Select one or more types of risk represented. Impacting. Select one or more areas that the risk would impact. Additional details for fine-grained analyses of the risk. Single loss expectancy. This can be populated if you know exactly what the financial amount is that would be lost if the risk occurred. For instance, a regulatory sanction or fine that is generally known. Annual rate of occurrence. How often do you expect this risk to occur? Select the most appropriate option from the drop-down. Time to cause, select the most appropriate toggle option. Time to impact, select the most appropriate toggle option. Key risk indicators. Key risk indicators play an important role in risk management programs and provide insights into possible weaknesses in the FSB's monitoring and control measures. Questions to consider. What failures in the FSB's day-to-day processes and procedures, operations, could be a trigger that the risk could occur? Are there monitoring mechanisms in place to provide regular management information on the outcomes achieved in the execution of the day-to-day processes and procedures that could provide vitally important data on whether these processes are achieving the goals set by management? List as many key risk indicators as possible. Describe the consequences if the risk occurred. Questions to consider. What will the consequences be? What will be impacted? How will they be impacted? List as many consequences as possible. Lastly, the status can be set once you have concluded the entire assessment process and you are certain regarding the determined course of action. The status of a risk could be set to one of three options. In progress, meaning that the risk can be improved and the FSP is in process of determining what needs to be done, by whom, and by when. Not applicable. In this instance, the FSP is absolutely certain that risk does not apply to it, as it may not be subject to the particular risk statement or item. Completed. The FSP is of the opinion that the FSP has exhausted its resources and power to further improve its risk response and control mechanisms for the foreseeable future. Once the risk has been thoroughly analyzed and concluded on the risk section, it is time to consider exactly what controls the FSP has in place and how effective they are in preventing the risk from occurring. Click on the Control section. Scroll down and start with describing the controls that are in place to manage the risk. List all the active controls that are implemented and measurable within the FSP that are designed to prevent the risk from occurring. Once the controls are listed, assess the design and execution effectiveness of the controls. The design effectiveness of controls. Questions to consider. How reliable are the controls? Will it identify anomalies in every instance? Can it be easily circumvented? The execution effectiveness of controls. Questions to consider. How well does the control perform in practice? Does it achieve what it was designed to do in all instances? Is it sufficiently foolproofed? Lastly, the residual risk. Question to consider. Considering the quality of the listed controls in place, has the FSP managed to reduce the risk from that reflected in that inherent risk indicator? How to gauge the residual risk. The following guideline will provide some understanding. For the residual risk to be low, controls must be fully implemented, tested, and continuously measured through proper statistics, management information, or data provided on a periodic basis. For the residual risk to be low to moderate, controls must be fully implemented and tested. However, measurement data has not been provided, or has only been provided once in the past. For the residual risk to be moderate, controls are only partially implemented, not stress tested, and not capable of being measured yet. For the residual risk to be moderate high, controls are not properly formulated yet or implemented and by no means measurable. For the residual risk to be high, no controls are in place. Any residual risk indicated above the low category will require further intervention as indicated in this table. Once the control section has been processed, move to the Improver section, which is the third and last section to be processed. In the event that the FSP has identified any weaknesses in the current controls in place, it should mitigate or remediate the risk by electing one or more control owners who are responsible to improve, formulate, implement, test and measure the effectiveness of controls on a periodic basis. Select the names of the responsible persons. Under commitment date, select a due date for when the mitigation measures and/or improvements should be concluded. Specific to-dos may be set up for control owners, containing specific instructions to be carried out within defined timelines. A repeat frequency may be determined by management for periodic formal review of the risk, by selecting an appropriate frequency from the drop-down provided. The analysis of the risk factor item is now complete and can be saved. The processed risk factor item's inherent and residual risk is now plotted accordingly on the heat maps to provide a visual understanding of how the implemented controls have resulted in the likely reduction of the inherent risk to which the FSP may be exposed, or the FSP has identified the need to establish or improve its controls relating to the risk. That concludes this tutorial on how to conduct risk assessments for participating FSPs. We hope that you found it informative. Until next time, thank you for watching.